This episode is brought to you by Bleacher Report. How do you follow sports? From college football to the NBA, Bleacher Report brings you the latest news, live scores, and epic highlights from your favorite leagues, teams, and athletes, all in one app. Dive into exclusive shows hosted by your favorite athletes and original Bleacher Report series with breaking news, rumors, and predictions all season long. Download Bleacher Report to personalize your coverage.
Whether you're ordering wings for the game, whipping up a 7-layer dip, or ordering pizza, there's something about football that makes you want to eat. And this football season, Uber Eats has the best deals on game day food. No matter what you're craving, from 2-for-1 pizza to buy one, get one wings, Uber Eats will be dropping new deals each week, all season long. Uber Eats, official on-demand delivery partner of the NFL. Order now. Terms and conditions apply. See app for details.
The number one selling product of its kind with over 20 years of research and innovation. Botox Cosmetic, out of botulinum toxin A, is a prescription medicine used to temporarily make moderate to severe frown lines, crow's feet, and forehead lines look better in adults.
Effects of Botox Cosmetic may spread hours to weeks after injection, causing serious symptoms. Alert your doctor right away as difficulty swallowing, speaking, breathing, eye problems, or muscle weakness may be a sign of a life-threatening condition. Patients with these conditions before injection are at highest risk. Don't receive Botox Cosmetic if you have a skin infection. Side effects may include allergic reactions, injection site pain, headache, eyebrow and eyelid drooping, and eyelid swelling. Allergic reactions can include rash, welts, asthma symptoms, and dizziness. Tell your doctor about medical history, muscle or nerve conditions including ALS or Lou Gehrig's disease, myasthenia gravis, or Lambert-Eaton syndrome, and medications, including botulinum toxins, as these may increase the risk of serious side effects. For full safety information, visit BotoxCosmetic.com or call 877-351-0300.
See for yourself at BotoxCosmetic.com.
When it comes to towing, seeing is believing. That's why Chevy Truck's advanced camera technology offers up to 8 available cameras for 14 unique views, so you can focus on the view that really matters. Chevrolet, together let's drive. Learn more about Chevy Trucks at Chevy.com. Safety or driver assistance features are no substitute for the driver's responsibility to operate the vehicle in a safe manner. Read the Vehicle Owner's Manual for important feature limitations and information.
Hi, everyone, and welcome on into another edition of Eye on the Enemy, powered by the Eagles Pinpull Network. I'm John Stolnis from BleedingGreenNation.com. You follow me on X and Blue Sky at John Stolnis. Coming up, we are going to preview this Sunday afternoon's game between the Eagles and the Cowboys. The great RJ Ochoa from Blogging the Boys, SB Nation's Cowboys site, will be joining us, as he did a few weeks ago when the Eagles went into Dallas and curb stomped the Cowboys with Cooper Rush leading the charge. And we're going to talk about the matchups to watch and get his thoughts on, the Cowboys are kind of hot right now. They won 4 out of their last 5. Is that a good thing for Dallas? And, how worried should we be as Eagles fans of this Dallas team coming into Philadelphia on Sunday afternoon, 1 o'clock Eastern time, and pulling off the upset? So we're going to talk about all that stuff coming up here in just a couple of minutes. But we'll start off with the big news here as I'm recording this on Friday afternoon. I'm going to say this now because I talked to RJ Friday morning before the Jalen Hurts news became official, but we were we talked about it as if we knew this was coming down the pike. But the Eagles did confirm on Friday afternoon that Jalen Hurts will not play. He is still in the concussion protocol. He has not practiced all week, and so he will not play on Sunday afternoon. Instead, it will be Kenneth Pickett getting out there, mixing it up. He was running with the first teamers all week long. He said during the course of the week that really helped him. To be able to practice all week with the first teamers really helps get the timing down. I can understand that totally. I still don't believe in Kenny Pickett, but this is why you went out and traded for him, for situations just like this, because it is unusual. It is unusual for a starting quarterback to make it through an entire season unscathed. Generally speaking, you need your backup quarterback to pitch in for a couple of games here and there. And really, that's all you're looking for your backup quarterback to do. If you have a situation like Dallas, where Dak Prescott goes down for the season, you're screwed. Whether it's Cooper Rush, whether it's Vinny Testaverde, no matter who it is, you're done. your star quarterback is out for the rest of the year, you are likely done. But in a situation like this, where it's more than likely that Jalen Hurts will be back for Week 18 against the Giants if the Eagles still need that game. But, this is, you need a backup quarterback who can play 2, 3, 4 weeks and keep you in these ball games and win the winnable games. Like, I wouldn't expect Kenny Pickett to come in and beat the Chiefs or the Bills or even the Bengals or the Rams and coming into Lincoln Financial Field. I wouldn't expect that. I would hope for it, but I wouldn't necessarily expect it. But the Dallas Cowboys are a team that is going to have their own backup quarterback under center. They're going to be missing their star wide receiver, CeeDee Lamb. The defense is going to have to do another job here on Sunday afternoon. They're going to have to do it likely without Nakobe Dean. Nakobe Dean is doubtful for this game on Sunday afternoon, which is a little bit of a surprise, but that is, unfortunately, it looks like they're going to have to go without him. The Eagles are likely to go with Oren Burks getting the start next to Zach Bond. Zach had mentioned during the course of the week that he was wearing the helmet with the green sticker on it, meaning he would be the one to communicate with, to hear what Vic Fangio wanted to do, calling the defenses. That's normally Nakobe Dean's job to set up the defense, but it's going to be Zach Bond. Obviously, that was portending to mean that Dean is doubtful to play. Jeremiah Trotter would be the only backup off-ball linebacker on the roster. So this could be a big blow for an Eagles defense that has relied on Nakobe Dean and Zach Bond to create havoc both in the run game and in the pass game as well. Bryce Huff is questionable for this game. The Eagles opened his 21-day practice window to return from injured reserve last week. He was limited in practice before being ruled out last week. Now, he's been a full go in practice this week. He's wearing a little bit of a club on his wrist, but it looks like he is going to be back in the Eagles pass rush rotation. They have until 4 o'clock Eastern time Saturday to activate Huff from IR in time for Sunday's game. So I believe that they will probably do that. But as far as Kenny Pickett goes, Kenny Pickett is not going to lead you to the playoffs. He's not going to win a playoff game for you. More than likely, he's not going to be your franchise quarterback like Pittsburgh was hoping that he would be. But he should win you a home game against a depleted Dallas Cowboys roster that has nothing to play for, and the Eagles have to win to lock up the NFC East. They could win the NFC East with a Commanders loss, but they're playing the Falcons this week, and I like the Commanders to win that game. But RJ noted on X, and I'll mention this as well, that really these two teams have very infrequently been able to get both starting quarterbacks on the field at the same time. Going back to 2020, the COVID year, you had DiNucci and Wentz facing off. Then you had, at the end of the season, Andy Dalton and Jalen Hurts. Now, Prescott missed that whole season. In 2021, the game in Dallas, you had Dak Prescott versus Jalen Hurts. Later on in the year, you had Dak Prescott against Jalen Hurts. So in 2021, both starting quarterbacks actually got to play against each other in both games. In 2022, it was Cooper Rush against Jalen Hurts in the first game, and then in the game in Dallas, in that wild game where Dak Prescott returned, he went up against Gardner Minshew. Minshew played okay, but threw some killer interceptions, and the Eagles lost that game in Dallas. 2023, you had Dak Prescott against Jalen Hurts and Dak Prescott against Jalen Hurts. So it seems like the odd years you get both starting quarterbacks going against each other. And then earlier this season, it was Cooper Rush against Jalen Hurts, and they're going to get Rush again this time with Kenny Pickett. Now, actually, in 2021, it was, as RJ noted, both Dallas and Philadelphia were locked into their respective spots. So that was when the Eagles sat Hurts. So it was actually also Dak Prescott and Gardner Minshew. So just really kind of crazy how this is all shaped out over these last few years. And once again, you're not going to have these two starting quarterbacks going at it. It's a battle of the backups. And this is what they traded Kenny Pickett for. The Eagles thought that Kenny Pickett could step up in games like this and pull out a win against an inferior opponent at home. This is what you need him to do. This is what you need them to do. He doesn't need to set the world on fire, but he's got to be able to throw the football enough to force Dallas to respect the pass so that they're not keying in on Saquon Barkley. And the offensive line, even though Dallas may load the box, they need to still create some running room for Saquon Barkley. in order for this offense to function against the Dallas defense that, as we'll hear with RJ in just a second, actually has gotten a whole lot better. But that's the news here on Friday afternoon. Jalen Hurts ruled out for Sunday afternoon's game against the Dallas Cowboys. So this Eagles game on Sunday afternoon moved from the 4 o'clock window now to the 1 o'clock window, which seemed to indicate that maybe the national interest level around the NFL is not typical for an Eagles-Dallas Cowboys matchup. But here, as Eagles fans, and I'm sure many of you listening, watching are Cowboys fans, it's a big week, especially for the Eagles as they try to clinch the NFC East. And joining me to talk about this game, a battle of the backups, RJ Ochoa from Blogging the Boys. No backup coming back on Eye on the Enemy. We just talked a couple of weeks ago ahead of the Eagles game in Dallas. RJ, how you feeling, buddy? How's it going?
Doing great, John. Merry Christmas. Happy New Year to you, your family, your audience. I'm so comatose on this season, and it's, we're finally almost through the end of the tunnel, like Andy Dufresne. I don't know that paradise necessarily awaits us on the other side, but it's finally, at long last, almost over, and for that, I'm grateful.
Yeah, when we spoke a few weeks ago, I know it was a real bad time. Dak Prescott had just been declared out for the season. It was, I think, the first game for Cooper Rush as the official starting quarterback with Dak Prescott being out. I will say that it certainly looks as if the Cowboys are catching their stride a little bit. It's too little too late, obviously, at this point in the season. A 7-8 record with 2 games left. There's really no chance they've been eliminated from the playoffs. But Cooper Rush has been playing better. I know the Cowboys have won 4 out of their last 5. Rush is a 9-to-1 touchdown to interception ratio over his last 6 games, 100.5 passer rating. So he's playing much better than I think he was when these teams first met. Before we get into the specific matchups, I did kind of want to just kind of pull back and take a larger view of the Cowboys and this season. And I imagine as a fan, it's been more enjoyable watching them win some of these games here over the last few weeks. But in terms of kind of setting yourself up for the future, you're losing some space in that, some positioning in the draft by winning all of these different games, as opposed to like maybe being able to go and get another high impact player in the top 10 picks or something like that. So are you conflicted at all about the fact that the Cowboys have won 4 out of their last 5, that Cooper Rush is playing a little bit better, and that it looks like Mike McCarthy probably will keep his job? I mean, how are you handling these last few weeks?
Yeah, it's a loaded question. I would say selfishly, I don't know if I told you, I hadn't been to a Cowboys game with a ticket in a very long time. And my dad and I went to the Texans game that was on Monday Night Football. That was the final loss before this little run started. So on a selfish level, I'm just really upset. Like you couldn't help us have a good time. So they were 3-7. And to that point, like if, the team tank things, just kind of took off at that point. And if they had tanked, if you want to call it that, they'd have a top 3 pick right now. They'd have a top 5 pick, whatever. Yeah. And so to your point, that would be a very good thing. But I mean, I mentioned my dad, right? Like I got into this line of work because I fell in love with the Cowboys and watching them with my dad, and whatever. Like we all have moments and stories like that. And the Cowboys have lost once since the Sunday before Thanksgiving, and this is the best time of year. Like even when your team sucks, even when it's pure crap of a tunnel that you are crawling through, if they make your holidays, better, I mean that's. Again, that the Christmas lights shine a little bit brighter, and it all existed under the shadow of what the season was to that point, and nobody can obviously ignore that. But it's been nice. I mean, you mentioned they were obviously 4-1 out of their last 5. You don't have to move the goalposts really a lot to say they could or should be 5-0. The game they lost was also on Monday Night Football against the Bengals. If you recall, Amani Oruwariye touching the punt and, just kind of a really basic oopsie-daisy that caused them to ultimately lose that game. And so or has it cost them draft position? I think that's objectively true. Like you can't deny that. But what I will say, and I guess maybe the way I've coped myself into accepting it, is for a little while, like that Texans game was kind of the last just like uber embarrassment. I mean, it was uber embarrassment after uber embarrassment for a while. The first Eagles game, obviously, in the middle of that. And I think we were, as a fan base, starting to wonder, is CeeDee Lamb the right guy? Did they pay this dude? Was it worth it? Because he was having some really poor body language. And just to use him as a specific example, in these last 6 weeks, I mean, he has been a warrior. I know they obviously shut him down, but to see him kind of thrive in a moment where his quarterback's gone and they're eliminated and nothing can go right. He doesn't have a Devontae Smith opposite of him to be his Robin. I mean, has been really impressive. And so Micah Parsons returned from his injury and said, we're not going to tank. I'm going to make sure of that. I'm going to make sure we're competitive. And he has walked that walk. And so if this 5-game, span led to Micah Parsons and CeeDee Lamb stepping out in front and leading the next generation of Dallas Cowboys players, then it was totally worth it to me. Even if that does cost them 10 draft pick spots, whatever you want to call it. I'm okay with Mike McCarthy coming back because ultimately, if you want to sign him to call it 4 or 5 year deal, and they stink next year, you just fire him, right? Like we say, like the Cowboys love to tell us that they would write any check they could to win the Super Bowl, which is obviously not true. But if you really are dissatisfied with Mike next year, just fire him. I mean, there's a lot of reasons to this, and I know I'm going long. It was a very loaded question, like I said.
Yeah.
But, who are the options that you're going to replace Mike McCarthy with? And even if you can whittle it down to a legitimate option, are you number one on their list? Are you ahead of Chicago?
Sure.
Are you ahead of, Philadelphia if things implode? I mean, like, again, just kind of casting ahead. So it is difficult, I think, to not come to terms with where the Cowboys are at and be okay with it.
So you mentioned that CeeDee Lamb, they've shut him down for the season. This is obviously a game where we've got a lot of injuries to talk about. Specifically, both starting quarterbacks are likely out. We don't know for sure as we record this on Friday morning what Jalen Hurts' status is, but all the indications are that he's not going to play in this game and that it'll be Kenny Pickett with some bruised ribs, likely giving it a go here on Sunday afternoon, going up against Cooper Rush, who, as I mentioned, has done much better here over these last few weeks than when the Eagles first played them, when he went 13 of 23 for 45 yards and was pulled for Trey Lance in the third quarter of that Eagles 34-6 win at AT&T Stadium. But it's a battle of the backups now, and at this point, I think if you're looking at the two quarterbacks and who has the edge there at quarterback, I don't see how you couldn't pick Cooper Rush to have a little bit more confidence in over Kenny Pickett, who played okay in relief of Jalen Hurts, and it's certainly much different getting a week of practice in ahead of a start. He's probably, you would hope, will be a little bit sharper than having to come in off the bench, not having gotten any reps with the ones pretty much all season long. But if this does come to pass where it's Kenny Pickett on Sunday afternoon, presumably he'll be a little bit more prepared. That said, the edge, I would think you would agree, would probably have to go to Cooper Rush, given how he's played and the fact that he's just even been in rhythm these last few weeks. So how will the loss of CeeDee Lamb, though, affect that?
Yeah, I think all that's really well said. And
thank you. I worked hard.
That's why, the Cowboys have had some funky lines in each of their last 2 games. They were underdogs. I don't know if you saw any of this against the Panthers. And the Panthers were favored for the first time in 2 years. Granted, they weren't even 3-point favorites at home, which, is somewhat representative of the fact that they wouldn't have been favorites on a neutral field. But I digress. Right. People want to get their Cowboys jokes off, and I'm not going to stand in the way of that at this point. And then they were like 4.5-point dogs or 6.5-point, I think, against Tampa last week. And I thought that was a little fishy as well. And I know this line is moved, which to your point suggests that Jalen Hurts is not going to play. Obviously, the CD news impacts that. I might take the points. I mean, just because I do trust Cooper Rush that much. And it's about more than just this 5-game stretch. I mean, Cooper Rush has been kind of, I would argue, since 2021, he's been among the top 5 backup quarterbacks in the NFL.
Oh, yeah.
He played a singular game in 2021. It was a Sunday night game against Minnesota. The Cowboys won. He obviously very famously played the 5 games in 2022, with the lone loss being at Philadelphia.
Right.
I mean, he has been wonderful, when called upon, which I do think is representative of Mike McCarthy being able to, make lemonade out of a particularly poor batch of lemons, which he doesn't get credit for. So, and I would also add a level of confidence I have, so if you want to call it that, in this weird kind of game, is that the Cowboys defense is playing out of their absolute mind right now. I mean, this might be the best version of them that we've seen in some time, which I know they've obviously been incredible over the last 3 years in the Micah Parsons era, but I mean, they are really, really fine. Like, if you think Cooper Rush is starting to kind of click and find his rhythm and his groove, it's nothing compared to the way the defense has started to stabilize.
Well, let's talk about the defense then a little bit. 12 takeaways since Week 12 leads the NFL, tied with the Steelers and the Bengals. They've intercepted the ball. They've had 7 interceptions, 5 fumble recoveries, and they're likely going up against a quarterback in Kenny Pickett, who during his time with Pittsburgh wasn't I don't have the numbers in front of me, but he wasn't a big interception guy, but also wasn't he's mostly a check down Charlie. Didn't really push the ball downfield. Now we saw last week against the Commanders, they did push the ball downfield with AJ Brown a little bit, and barring a drop from Devontae Smith, Kenny Pickett, makes a couple of plays late in that game to put the Eagles in position to ice the game and win it eventually. So as he gets ready to play this Dallas defense with Micah Parsons, who's breathing fire, and a secondary that's getting a lot of turnovers right now, what's been the big difference? Why have we seen this turnaround from the Dallas defense?
Yeah, I certainly think that Micah returning from injury has changed, everything. I mean, he is such a special player. I would offer that the Cowboys are getting an interior pass rush in a way that they haven't in a very long time. Osa Odighizuwa is playing tremendously, probably his final 2 games as a Cowboy, because he's going to get paid, and we all know how the Cowboys handle that side of things. I would say that the secondary is playing extraordinarily well. They are the only team in the NFL that has had at least 7 secondary players, I should say, log over 150 defensive snaps this season. So it really has been this game of musical chairs, and they're obviously benefiting from what Micah is able to do up front. But we've really seen Deron Bland kind of return to who he was, obviously, prior to his injury. There's no Trayvon Diggs. Obviously, he was also shut down for the season. But from a safety standpoint, last week was probably Donovan Wilson's best game ever as a Cowboy. Malik Hooker's been playing really well. It's just been, I would say that Micah really has been a rising tide that has lifted all of the boats. In between those two things, obviously, I think everybody was well aware of DeMarvion Overshown and the star he was starting to become before his tragic injury. But Maris Liufau, who was the second, third-round pick of the Cowboys in the draft out of Notre Dame, has just been incredible. He's forced a fumble in each of the last 2 games. Obviously, his role increased with the DeMarvion Overshown injury. And again, I mean, everything is so much easier when Micah Parsons is causing so much havoc up front, but they really are. I think that I was really against the Mike Zimmer hire, and I have hated on it for a very long time. And I don't even fully walk all of it back. But I do think that, he has been dealing with just a litany of injuries, and things have finally reached a point where he's able to kind of operate the way he wants to, and there's a little bit more normal status quo, and we're seeing the benefits of that, obviously.
Now, talk about the run defense a little bit, because in the last game the Eagles played against the Cowboys, Saquon Barkley didn't have to do a whole lot. He essentially took the fourth quarter off, and the passing game really led the way. Barkley had just 66 yards on 14 carries. He is getting pretty close to a 2,000-yard season. Barkley has 1,838 rushing yards. He's 162 yards away from a 2,000 season. He would need to average 134 yards over these last 2 games in order to break Eric Dickerson's record. Now, not impossible. I mean, that's certainly within the realm of possibility. And a big game against Dallas, he's had a 200-yard rushing game this year. If he gets another one of those, now all of a sudden you're in shouting distance. And the Dallas defense has played much better, but as terms of a rush defense, it hasn't been quite as good as the pass defense. They're 27th in yards allowed, 32nd in rushing touchdowns allowed, 30th in yards per attempt. They're allowing 4.8 yards per attempt. But like we saw with Washington last week, if Jalen Hurts isn't there to kind of take some of the pressure off of Barkley and those RPOs, man, I throw the RPOs out if Kenny Pickett's in there in terms of rushing options with nobody is going to be keeping an eye on Pickett. Everybody's going to be flowing with Saquon Barkley. Do you see a game here where they go single high, where they load the box and they've just decided to themselves, we'll even single up AJ and Devontae Smith every once in a while in order to key in on Saquon Barkley?
Yeah, and I think a lot of that calculus rests on how interested Philly is in winning this game. Obviously, there's some room for error. I would argue there's a lot of room for error just because I think that the world would pick Philly to beat New York next week in a game that you have to clinch the East. And nobody wants to get there. I recognize that from an Eagles standpoint, but because you're a little bit more cavalier when you have the extra lives to play with in Super Mario. You know what I mean?
Yeah, exactly. When you go out on the level 3-1 and you get infinite lives, I mean, certainly. But I'll say this, in 2022, it's almost the exact same scenario when Jalen Hurts got hurt against the Bears and they went into Dallas and lost, which it was a tough loss, but an understandable one with Gardner Minshew. But then they come home and they lose to the Saints at Lincoln Financial Field with Gardner Minshew, a chance to wrap up the conference and number 1 seed overall and couldn't get it done. So then you had, again, against a last place Giants. No, it wasn't a last place Giants team in 2022. The Giants went to the playoffs, but they didn't have anything to play for. Right. So you're getting a home game against the Giants and you got to win that game. And Jalen Hurts comes back maybe before you would have ordinarily wanted him to. They get it done, but it was sweaty palms time in that Week 18 game. And I know Eagles fans don't want any part of having to go through that again.
This year, Santa's bringing the power of Energizer into his workshop.
Whoa, the Energizer Bunny's got so much power.
Wait, he's powered up all the toys. I think that means we're done for the year.
I love this bunny.
He's the hardest working helper the North Pole has ever seen. And he wants all your gifts to have the power of the #1 longest lasting AA battery. So this holiday season, stock up on Santa's and the elves' favorite battery, Energizer Ultimate Lithium.
This episode is brought to you by NFL Sunday Ticket on YouTube TV. Catch every moment of your team's playoff push with NFL Sunday Ticket on YouTube TV. You'll get amazing features like multi-view, and right now, it's only $49 for the rest of the NFL regular season. So give yourself the ultimate gift this holiday season. Get NFL Sunday Ticket for $49. Sign up now at youtube.com/Sunday Ticket. Device and content restrictions apply. Local and national games on YouTube TV. NFL Sunday Ticket for out-of-market games excludes digital-only games.
I completely understand that, obviously, and it kept Dallas's hopes alive of winning the NFC East entering that Week 18 game as well. Obviously, Philly took care of business, and it was what it was. But so that's where I think the answer to this ultimately lies within Nick Sirianni, presuming his beef with Zach Ertz is over, and he has time to address those things, because it is a matter of how much you want to put your foot on the gas. Because I certainly believe if you want, to floor it, I absolutely believe that Saquon can achieve that. I think he can hit 150, 160, whatever, and especially because it probably has to be the Saquon show if you really want to sell out to win this game. It just is a matter of how much are we willing to sell out. Are we really trying to risk everything? Because obviously Philly's chances of getting the 1 seed this year are not completely shot, but they're effectively shot. So it is a delicate balance here. I mean, I would offer that Dallas is a little bit more used to playing this way right now, and they're kind of used to playing with this level of pride, whereas Philly's on this slippery slope. To your point, you're kind of thinking back to 2 years ago, are we going to take our foot off the gas? Are we going to chill? Are we going to try to manufacture our own bye later next week if we do win this game? Or are we lucky enough to where we can lose this game to Dallas and Atlanta can do our dirty work for us, and we can still put our feet up next week and get the best of both worlds? It is a difficult thing. So I know that's kind of an answer. I think that this is obtainable, absolutely, if Philadelphia wants to get it. But I do think you have to be careful because you're playing a playoff game in 2 weeks.
Yeah, but that's the thing, though, is in 2022, they were going for that 1 seed, which did end up giving them the bye.
Right.
They would, in my opinion, I'm going all in on trying to win this game against Dallas so that you get that bye next week, like you mentioned, because you're not going to have that first round bye in the playoffs. So you're going to have to play in that wild card round. So,
do you think Atlanta beats Washington?
No,
John?
I don't. No. I think Washington rolls over Atlanta.
Then you talked about the sweaty palms. The worst New Year's week of all time is Philly loses to Dallas, and you deal with if you are annoyed by that. Obviously, I don't know that you really are this season because the Cowboys are what they are and everything is what it is. But everything becomes a little bit more annoying in that sense. Then Washington wins, and this Zach Ertz thing, because he plays for them, becomes even larger, and it becomes whatever. And it's probably the team that Philly plays in the wild card round. That would make for, I think, maybe an even more annoying Week 18 than 2022 offered.
It's interesting. No one in Philadelphia is talking about the Zach Ertz thing. It's not.
That is interesting.
It's not a story. At this point with Nick Sirianni, as long as he's not cursing out the fan base or whatever, it's just kind of whatever. Nobody is talking about. We are super fixated on Jalen Hurts' health, essentially. Because as of right now, we don't know where he is in the concussion protocol. We don't have any idea how close he is to returning, if he could possibly play this week. It might make more sense, even if he could clear, that they would sit him for this week just to kind of, I think the feeling is that Kenny Pickett, you probably can beat the Cowboys with Kenny Pickett, but you certainly give yourself a much better chance. If Jalen Hurts is fully healthy, he's gonna play. And he probably, if it's a concussion protocol, they wouldn't clear him unless he was fully healthy and ready to play. But I get the idea behind not forcing him into this game here on Sunday afternoon.
So a quick question, if you don't mind, because I'm curious. What would you prefer to not ride Saquon in this game in the event that Philly has to play to win next week? Because or do you want to risk bringing Jalen Hurts back, or do you want to try then to do you want to give Kenny Pickett enough experience to where he can beat the Giants successfully? I mean, these are fun conversations. That's what this thing is all about.
I want this team to go about their business as they ordinarily would. So if that means running Saquon 26 times in this game, if that means having Jalen Hurts come back, I'm all for making this as much of a must-win game as possible. I don't want, because I think then you start to back yourself into a corner. If you start to think like, well, we've got next week to fall back on, then who in a divisional game, who knows what kind of crazy stuff can happen against a weakened opponent last week of the season. You just don't want it to come to that. So control the things that you can control. If Jalen Hurts can't play, you ride Kenny Pickett for as long as you can, and you open you just as much of the playbook as you can with him. You run Saquon Barkley as much as you can, and then try and get that week off next week and give everybody a breather. And if you end up doing all those things and lose, and you got to use all those guys next week, so be it. But I would rather put my pedal to the metal and hit the gas and try and aggressively win these games as much as possible, because I think the mentality of, well, we have this to fall back on, we have an extra week and all that kind of stuff, I think that can play dangerous games inside the mind of a professional athlete.
I think that's really well said, and I also selfishly wanted to know, because now if the Cowboys win, I will take more satisfaction out of it than I would have, because it was really difficult to feel like this was an opportunity to play spoiler, because Philly's season or nothing is really over if the Eagles lose this game. But it is nice to know that there will be legitimate squirming if the Cowboys win.
At least on my part, there will be. There'll be legitimate squirming on my part. I just don't like. I don't want to have to face a must-win game last week of the season, even if it is against the Giants, because it's a rivalry. Who knows? And you shouldn't lose to the Cowboys this week. And the Cowboys are, I think, a better team than the Giants, obviously. But who's to say? The one other matchup I did want to mention to you. It was really weird last week how Braden Mann was not able to kick the ball into the end zone on kickoffs, and the Eagles routinely gave the Commanders great field position. I think they averaged the average starting position was like the 34-yard line for the Commanders last week. And in the second half, especially with a penalty on the final kickoff after the Eagles went up by 5 points, they gave the Commanders a super short field in order to score the game-winning touchdown with like 10 seconds left. So you even push them back 15 yards or 10 yards, they might not get close enough to score that touchdown. And in Kevontae Turpin, the Cowboys have one of the better returners in the league. I wouldn't be surprised at all if Jake Elliott is doing the kickoffs this week. Turpin really seemed to struggle. Braden Mann really seemed to struggle in what was not overly cold conditions. Right. Everybody was talking about the conditions. It was cold, and it was like in the upper 30s. It was like
for my taste, at least.
For me, if I'm kicking a ball, sure, but these guys have kicked in 35-degree weather before. I didn't get that at all, but that seemed to be the case. And so my concern is kickoffs in this game, and if Braden Mann can't get the ball into the end zone, it's supposed to be warmer. I think it could rain a little bit here, but that's the last matchup that concerns me a little bit is Turpin on the kickoff returns.
I mean, you're certainly right to be concerned about him. And I think, though, he's become such a bigger part of the offense, which was something I really doubted. A lot of people suggested that early in his time with the team. And this whole thing never felt like a trick or a gimmick, but it felt somewhat like that to me. But he got involved on offense over the second half of last year and has really been a part of things this year. And again, it felt like, oh man, the Cowboys are just depending on this guy because they don't want to do anything else. But he is incredibly dynamic. And so not to sort of make you fear anything else, but I would say that I don't know that anybody kicks to him at this point in time. I think at this point you're almost better off booting it out or, sort of bad circumstances and letting whoever start at the 34-yard line on average, to your point, than putting it in his hands, because he truly is that dynamic. But he could break one open on offense. I mean, he has come so close so many different times. He's had big moments on offense. He is maybe the most catalytic player, I think, in this game for the Cowboys, especially now with CeeDee Lamb not on the field. And I would offer that they're going to depend on him all the more on offense because of that specifically.
That was going to be my last question. With CeeDee Lamb out, what does the offense look like? How do they go about going up against this Eagles defense, which got 5 turnovers themselves last week and gave up had a really terrible fourth quarter, but other than that, played pretty well against Jaden Daniels and the Commanders, and have been one of the NFL's stingiest defenses since their bye in Week 5.
I mean, last week we saw the Cowboys air it out early, and I think they were really nervous about Tampa's front and obviously what Todd Bowles was going to be able to do, and so they just decided to avoid that altogether because prior to last week they'd seen a lot of success over like a month with Rico Dowdle, and he's really close to 1,000 yards rushing on the season, which would be, I know it's not what it was, in a 16-game regular season and things like that, but given what the Cowboys season has been, it would be something worth celebrating, and so I think that's part of the plan. And it was Zeke Elliott, by the way, who got his 1,000 yards in Philly 3 years ago in that Week 18 game. But I think it's Rico as long as that's working, and if not, I think it's just low-hanging fruit. It's who's open. I mean, what screen is open for 3-4 yard dump-offs and somebody make a play? I think it's the Jalen Tolbert, Jake Ferguson, Kevontae Turpin show. For a little while, Luke Schoonmaker was finally getting to become a part of things. He had that really controversial moment in Philadelphia last year, that catch right down near the goal line, obviously.
Oh, yeah.
But, yeah, I mean, the Cowboys offense had come alive mostly because of CeeDee Lamb. So without him, they are fundamentally different.
Well, that brings us to the time of our time together, that portion of our time together, RJ, where you tell me how you think this game is going to go. I mean, in my opinion, the Eagles really have no business losing a game with Cooper Rush throwing to the people that you just mentioned and the running backs that the Cowboys have at their disposal, even given how good the defense is playing right now. How do you see things shaking out on Sunday afternoon?
Yeah, I'm 11-4 at picking Cowboys games this year, just for some context. So pretty good. I am going to lean Philly. I'm not as confident, obviously, as I would have been had Jalen Hurts played in this game, but I do think that I agree with you completely. I think you sell out to win this game so that you can worry about whatever happens with the benefit of time. You don't want to play with that kind of fire. And I think the Cowboys are already kind of waving the white flag. I think they're, ordering the code red, so to speak. I think CeeDee Lamb's shutdown is representative of that. I think they probably always had a plan to shut him down when they became mathematically eliminated, and it just happened too close to kickoff last week for them to adjust the way they had prepared for Tampa. And so it would behoove the Cowboys to lose this game. Finally. I mean, they to the point we mentioned, they really damaged their draft position in this cute little fun run. But with 2 games to go, you can improve upon that just a little bit, especially if you get some help around the NFL. So it works out for everybody if Philly wins this game, and so I think that's the agenda that everybody wants to accomplish.
Well, let's all hold hands, sing Kumbaya, and welcome in an Eagles win on Sunday afternoon against the Dallas Cowboys. These teams don't usually play at 1 o'clock in the afternoon. We'll see if they can figure out how to get their bodies ready for this matchup here on Sunday. Make sure you're following everything that's going on with the Cowboys. Keep an eye on the enemy. Go to bloggingtheboys.com, and you can check out all of RJ's stuff there. RJ, thanks for joining me on Eye on the Enemy once again, buddy. Always a pleasure.
John, you're the man. Sorry the Phillies couldn't get Kyle Tucker.
Shut up. All right, and I'll finish up the podcast with my prediction here. I think this is going to be an ugly game with Kenny Pickett. Obviously, I don't think this offense is going to race out to another 21-0 lead. I'm a little concerned about the absence of Nakobe Dean, but there's enough good players on this defense that they should be able to get by against a far weakened Dallas offense. I don't know how they're going to throw the ball in this game. I don't know how Dallas gets anything going through the air. I know Cooper Rush is playing better, but last week's fourth quarter aside, this Eagles defense has played very well. They forced a lot of turnovers last week, gave up a lot of points, but forced a lot of turnovers late. I think it was just a fluky game. I felt like the defense played kind of manic last week. That was the word I described. They just seemed like they were running around like chickens with their heads cut off for a lot of it. They were kind of playing undisciplined football. The 12-man on the field penalty that resulted in a giveaway touchdown in that game. I mean, they handed the Commanders a 45-yard touchdown. They handed them that because they were completely confused about who was entering the game, who was going to be out of the game. So that was a big part of that game that nobody really talks about. They handed the Commanders 6 points, a long touchdown in a game where the Eagles had a big lead. They let the Commanders get close with one huge chunk play that absolutely didn't need to happen. So that was a big play in that game. I don't think we're going to see that again from the Eagles defense. I think unlike in 2022, when the Eagles had Gardner Minshew under center, and the offense struggled badly against a New Orleans Saints team that was out of the playoff picture but was playing pretty good defense. This game is very reminiscent of that game against New Orleans. A game at home. That time in 2022, it was a chance to clinch the 1 seed and a first-round bye, which they couldn't do. They lost that game to the Saints, and they needed Jalen Hurts to come back and win a game against the Giants, a Giants team that ended up going to the playoffs but didn't end up needing that game. It was a throwaway game for the Giants, so they didn't really start their starters. The Eagles still struggled in that game a little bit, but they ended up winning, getting home field advantage, getting the first-round bye. That's not at stake here. What's at stake? Winning this game so that Week 18 becomes essentially your bye week ahead of what they hope will be a 3-week NFC playoff gauntlet, with 2 of those games at least being at home. Getting that number 2 seed locked away on Sunday afternoon. I think it's really important they do that so that they can rest everyone else, so we don't have to rush Jalen Hurts back if you don't need to. Get everybody fresh, get everybody healthy, get everybody on the same page, and go out there and get the job done this year. Because unlike in 2022, if you don't get the job done here in the penultimate week of the season, you're not going to get a bye at all. You got to play Week 18. You got to play it against the Giants team that has nothing to play for, but it's a divisional game, as you heard me talking about with RJ. It just makes me nervous. Plus, you run the risk of guys getting hurt if they have to play in that game ahead of the playoffs. So it's the spread this week is pretty big. I think the Eagles are favored. Even with the Jalen Hurts news, the Eagles are still favored in this game. It's still 7.5 points, and so the Eagles should, even with Kenny Pickett, should win this game comfortably. I will go along with what Vegas is feeling about this game, and I think the Eagles and Nick Sirianni learned their lesson from 2022. I think they take care of business against the Dallas Cowboys and sweep the Cowboys for the first time since 2017. I think the Eagles go on to win this game. I'll say 28-17. All right, everybody, that's going to do it for this edition of Eye on the Enemy. My thanks once again to the great RJ Ochoa for joining us. If you haven't, folks, make sure you check out all of our podcasts at the Eagles Pinpool Network, and let me know what you think of the show, leaving a 5-star rating and a review at Apple Podcasts over at the Eagles Pinpool Network. Mention Eye on the Enemy so that I know you're talking about this show, and let me know what you think. And please read all my work at bleedinggreennation.com as well. Thanks, everyone, for tuning in. We will talk to you next week right here on Eye on the Enemy.